I have always strived to reveal mysterious and often shocking stories from the world of cybercrime to my viewers. In the universe of technology, there exists a hidden side where the laws of the physical world seem like an illusion and moral boundaries are blurred. The story you are about to hear today is striking not only because of the scale of events, but also because of how far a person can go, driven by the desire to outsmart the system. Our protagonist began his journey with what seemed like innocent curiosity. But when fascination crosses the line, risk becomes a game, and the system begins to turn against you. Virtual crime turns into a real hunt, and in this case, the main enemy turned out not even to be the law itself, but the unpredictable allies capable of changing the course of events in an instant. So get ready to dive into the hidden depths of technological hacking. This story is a warning to anyone who thinks they can remain invisible in the world of cybercrime. Ready? Then let's begin. Hello. Although I have never had any serious problems with the law, I have always been interested in the dark side of technology. All these stories about teenagers in the past finding weaknesses in ATMs and withdrawing money were inspiring to me. I thought it was impossible nowadays that banks had secured all their ATMs, but a few months ago I came across some new information that made me doubt all these beliefs. There was a new hacking model that allowed you to interact with ATMs remotely without a physical connection. It exploited weaknesses in the wireless interfaces of NFC-enabled ATMs for fast transactions. The essence of this model was the use of special software that allowed intercepting signals between the ATM and the server, as well as controlling the ATM functions without the need to physically interact with it. This created the possibility of unauthorized cash withdrawals simply by being close to the ATM. The system had weaknesses in signal encryption, which made it possible to read data and gain access to control the device's functions. It all seemed too fantastic, but it could have taken me to a whole new level. It all started when I came across a mention of a so-called remote attack on new ATMs on a closed forum. I wasn't a programming or hacking expert, so before I bought the hardware, I first decided to buy software that would allow me to carry out this hack without deep technical knowledge. Buying this software turned out to be quite a challenge. It was sold only on one forum I knew of on the darknet, which was very difficult to get to. To gain access, I had to go through a thorough verification process. First, I had to find an invitation, which in itself was almost impossible because only members of the forum could invite new members. So, I needed to find someone who could provide me with an invitation. I looked through many other forums, trying to find at least some mention of the possibility of getting an invitation to this closed forum. I wrote messages to different people, left requests on platforms where darknet issues were discussed, but most of the answers were either useless or potential scams. Several times I was almost hooked by scammers, but managed to avoid being deceived at the last moment. Eventually, through a member of another forum, I managed to find a person who had access to the right invitation. It was a long process, and at first he did not agree to sell it to me. I had to convince this person that I was not dangerous or suspicious, and only after several weeks of persistent attempts and negotiations did he finally agree to sell me the invitation for $5,000. Once I got to the forum, I realized that buying software would not be easy either. The forum was a closed community where newcomers were treated with distrust. To gain access to the information I needed, I had to build a reputation by participating in discussions and proving that I was not an undercover agent or a fraudster. Only after that did I manage to get the contact of the seller who offered the software I needed. The purchase process itself was quite complicated. I had to make a payment via cryptocurrency, and the amount was significant, about $20,000, as well as use special communication channels such as encrypted messengers and file sharing platforms to get the download link. The seller assured me that everything would work simply, and even a person without special skills would be able to execute the attack. It was my chance to try something new and see if such technologies could really work. Unlike the old methods, where attackers used USB ports and special devices, the new software allowed them to intercept signals and interact with the ATM without a physical connection. The system worked by exploiting weaknesses in the wireless interface that new ATMs are now equipped with. It was like magic. You hold up a special device, and the ATM dispenses cash. It sounded too good to be true, but I decided to take a chance and see if it really worked. First, I bought the equipment I needed to test this new scheme. The device was not cheap. I spent about $3,000 on a special reader and programmer. It could be connected to a phone to control the hacking from a distance, bringing it to the ATM unnoticed. Then it was all about the settings and the code. All these instructions were included in the purchase of the software itself. First, I decided to test the device at the nearest NFC-enabled ATM. I carefully prepared for this test, checked all the settings and connections to avoid any mistakes. When I was standing near the ATM, I tried not to attract attention, looking like an ordinary passerby, just looking for something on my phone. I connected my reader to the phone, launched the app, and started tuning the frequencies, following the instructions I had received with the software. It seemed like everything was happening incredibly slowly. Every second was dragging on incredibly long. After a minute that seemed like an eternity, the screen showed a signal that the hack was successful. My heart beat faster, and adrenaline began to fill my body. It was the moment of truth. I chose a small test amount of $100. I was nervous, constantly looking around to make sure no one was paying attention. And what do you think? The ATM dispensed $100. It was like a film. My first reaction was that I couldn't even believe that this scheme was working. I felt a wave of euphoria mixed with fear and tried not to show my emotions on my face. After this success, I immediately decided that I would continue. However, now I had plans to act on a larger scale, with larger sums of money, and in other cities to avoid the risk of attracting too much attention in one place. I could already imagine traveling from city to city, feeling the same adrenaline, excitement, and quick income that I had received that first time. My head was full of dreams of the great opportunities that were now opening up before me. This was my chance to break out of the mundane and achieve something more, even if the path to this was not entirely legal. Before I started these journeys, I made an important decision to quit my day job. I realized that I could no longer continue to live a double life, working from 9 to 5 and doing something that could potentially bring me much more money. I wanted to focus fully on this activity, and quitting was a step towards freedom for me. Of course, it was risky, but I felt that the benefits far outweighed the potential dangers. For the next few weeks, I traveled from city to city, stopping at NFC-enabled ATMs every time. It was a real challenge, but at the same time an exciting adventure. However, things didn't always go as smoothly as I wanted. Sometimes the ATMs would give me errors, and instead of a successful hack, I would see messages on the screen like "insert card" or "transaction not supported." Such moments caused me to panic, especially when there were people around and I risked attracting unwanted attention. Sometimes I had to leave the place of failure as quickly as possible to avoid suspicion from passersby or bank security. I started to notice that some ATMs were not hackable. This could be due to an upgrade in their systems or simply due to the peculiarities of a particular device. Each failure made me become more cautious and analyze my actions to avoid repeating mistakes. I tried to understand why the device didn't work. Was it a matter of settings? Or perhaps the ATM had more secure software? I had a feeling that banks were starting to crack down on people like me. After I had accumulated enough money and was confident in my abilities, I thought of putting together a team. I realized that working on my own was becoming increasingly risky, and that to scale up my operation, I needed people who were willing to do it for a fee. I started looking for potential partners among those who were active on shadow forums. It was not an easy task. I had to find people I could trust because the risk of exposure was too great. Each conversation started with caution and suspicion. Most forum participants were not keen to discuss such topics openly, so I had to build relationships gradually, convincing them that I was serious and ready to share the profits. I offered them 30% of each transaction and promised to teach them how to use the equipment and software. I even sent some potential employees small amounts of money up front to prove that I was serious and solvent. Eventually, I managed to find a few people who agreed to become part of my team. They were from different cities, and this gave me the opportunity to operate more widely without leaving a trace in one particular region. We agreed to use special communication channels such as encrypted messengers and anonymous platforms for information exchange. Each member of the team received instructions and equipment, and I became a kind of coordinator, monitoring their actions and helping them in case of problems. At first, everything went quite well. My people started hacking ATMs in their cities, and we quickly multiplied the money we earned. With each successful operation, we became more and more confident in our capabilities. But at the same time, I felt that with each new step we were approaching a line that should not be crossed. The team was a big risk. One wrong move and all our actions could be exposed. But at that time, the thirst for easy money blinded me, and I kept going, hoping that luck would be on our side. Over time, it became clear that the banks were beginning to identify serious problems with our actions. These operations were already causing them too many losses, which made it impossible for them not to react or to react slowly. Banks began to invest significant resources in addressing this problem by hiring cybersecurity experts and updating their software. They conducted a thorough analysis of all suspicious transactions and installed new security measures to prevent such hacks in the future. It was not an easy task, and the software update was done gradually, not on all ATMs at once. But over time, I began to notice that the cases when the ATM refused to comply with the software request became more frequent. This was the first signal that banks were beginning to adapt to new threats. The biggest shock for me was that some ATMs no longer just rejected the transaction, but also activated an alarm, calling the police to the scene. This came to light by accident when one of my employees tried to withdraw money and saw an error on the ATM screen. He acted according to the instructions I gave to all my employees before starting work. In this case, they just quickly walked away from the ATM and blended in with the crowd. However, it so happened that he did not move far away from the ATM but stayed close to it. And he was able to detect that in about 7 to 10 minutes the cops arrived at the ATM. From that moment on, it became clear that the banks had started to cooperate with the police, and the situation had become even more dangerous, and every attempt to withdraw money could result in an arrest. So I stepped up security measures and told my employees that as soon as anything strange or unusual was noticed, they needed to leave the place as quickly as possible, calmly and confidently. My team started to notice that more and more often the ATMs were behaving unpredictably, and successful transactions were becoming rare. It was inevitable. The banks were adapting, and we were losing our main tool for getting easy money. At that moment, I had an all-or-nothing feeling. I realized that if I didn't find a way around the new security measures, our operations would quickly become impossible. I decided to take a chance and find someone who could help us. I found out that one of the guys who worked on fixing the problem in the cyber department of one of the banks could be a potential ally. He was an expert in ATM security, and I thought he might know how to get around the new patches. I started looking for a way to contact him. Through friends on forums and a few suspicious contacts, I managed to get in touch with him. After several days of negotiations, he finally agreed to meet, but only on the condition of complete anonymity and security guarantees. We met in a remote location, and I explained to him exactly what I wanted. At first, he was skeptical and reluctant to help me, knowing the risks, but the prospect of a significant profit gradually made him change his mind. The guy agreed to help us get around the new patches and improve our software so that it would work again in invisible mode without any problems, but only for a cosmic sum, which might seem like $4 million to a normal person. But at that time, it was no longer a problem for me. The only thing I wanted was to get the software working so that my team and I could continue to rob ATMs. So I just paid him up front. He knew how to get around new updates to the banking software because he had worked on their development himself. It took some time, and every day was filled with tension. I realized that any mistake could ruin everything. In the end, he rewrote some of the code, optimized the reader, and made changes that allowed the software to be invisible to new security systems again. It was a huge breakthrough, and we decided to test the system again. The first test was successful, and the ATM dispensed cash without any errors. It was incredible. We were back in the game, and now we had a much more powerful tool in our hands. Our team became more confident and we increased the amounts, not thinking that it could end badly. However, every setback reminded me that I was playing with fire and that one day my luck might run out forever. Another 3 months passed. I started to feel like a professional in this business. Each successful withdrawal only enhanced this effect. There was no longer the nervousness I felt at the beginning, when I was afraid of every passerby's glance. It seemed that I was in full control of the situation. Money was flowing in, and I started to afford more than ever before. I bought expensive things, went on trips to exotic places. I had a life in which there was no place for routine work anymore. The amount of money I was able to earn from this scheme was just incredible. I made about $100 million in total. It made me feel like I had finally achieved what I had always wanted, the opportunity to live the life I had always dreamed of. I was overcome with a sense of invincibility that made me forget about all the risks and continue on. But about a month later, I started to feel like we were being watched. Information on forums about this method also began to disappear. It seemed that someone was actively cleaning up any mention of this bug. Eventually, I found out the shocking truth. The person I had hired to improve the software turned out to be an undercover FBI officer from the cybercrime unit. It turned out that his real task was to collect enough evidence about my activities and those of the entire team to qualify it as organized crime. The FBI carefully followed our every move, collecting evidence to ensure our arrest. The guy I thought was my ally was actually part of a larger FBI operation aimed at taking down our group. Not only did he improve our software, but he also built in features that allowed the FBI to track all of our activities. They collected information about every transaction, every place we operated, and every member of my team. All of our conversations, all of our plans, all of it was carefully recorded and passed on to the security service. I didn't realize that all those days when I felt invincible were just part of a big game I was playing. The FBI waited patiently for us to gather enough evidence against ourselves and only then decided to act. They didn't just want to catch me, they wanted to make sure that all of our team members were sentenced to the longest possible sentences. And now, when my equipment stopped working again, and I started to feel that something was wrong, they were ready to act. It was the end. All my dreams, all my plans for easy money and a new life were shattered. The FBI had not only detained me, they had destroyed everything I had built over the past months. Now I had to not only answer for my actions, but also realize that every single step I took had been controlled from the moment I had the all-or-nothing feeling. It was an operation planned down to the smallest detail, and I became its victim. Now I am waiting for the trial. I did not even hire lawyers because I used to work in the legal field, and I understand that lawyers will not help me with this amount of evidence. My only hope is to plead guilty and explain in court that I was driven by a thirst for easy money and couldn't stop myself. I hope that the judge will take my confession into account and reduce my sentence. Thus ended the story of ATM hacks and the fine line where the thirst for quick money turns into a real hunt. But do you want to know how the first ATM scams began in the past, or how one group managed to build an entire shadow empire by creating payment terminals that steal your data? Choose the next video and learn about the most dangerous schemes of cybercriminals.